She was America's sweetheart, the girl every man wanted to marry and every woman wanted to be. But what if I told you that behind Doris Day's sunny smile was a woman who'd been through hell, a woman who survived abuse, betrayal, and heartbreak that would have destroyed most people? The men who loved her on screen had no idea they were falling for someone whose real story was darker than any movie she ever made. Doris Day, an icon built on secrets. Let's start with what you think you know. Born Doris Marianne Kapp on April 3rd, 1922, her mother named her after actress Doris Kenyon. She stormed into the entertainment world like a force of nature. But here's the first secret that shaped everything. She had an older brother, Richard, who passed away before she was born, and another brother, Paul, who was several years older. That loss shaped her mother's protectiveness in ways that would haunt Doris her entire life. Think about that for a moment. From birth, Doris was living in the shadow of a dead child, with a mother who was terrified of losing another baby. That kind of suffocating love creates performers, people who learn early that being good enough means being perfect, always. Her mother, Alma, wasn't just protective. She was obsessively controlling. Every aspect of Doris's childhood was managed, monitored, controlled. Dance lessons weren't just fun activities. They were Alma's way of living vicariously through her surviving daughter. The pressure was immense, but it taught Doris something crucial. Performance could earn love. In 1939, she started as a big band singer. Sounds glamorous, right? Wrong. The big band circuit was brutal. Late nights, cramped buses, seedy venues, and men who thought female singers were fair game for harassment. But Doris learned to navigate it all with that million-dollar smile, even when she was exhausted, homesick, or scared. By 1945, she was topping charts with Sentimental Journey and My Dreams Are Getting Better All the Time, with Les Brown and his band of renown. But success came with a price nobody talks about. She was making money, sure, but she was also learning that her value was tied directly to her ability to make other people happy. Miss a note, show fatigue, display any human weakness, and the opportunities disappeared. When she went solo in 1947, she didn't just record songs. She recorded over 650 tracks by 1967. 650. That's not passion, that's desperation. The studio system owned her, worked her like a machine, and she smiled through every grueling session because she'd learned early that showing weakness meant losing everything. Her film career launched with Romance on the High Seas in 1948, and suddenly she was everywhere. But here's what the publicity departments never mentioned. Doris was terrified of flying, a phobia that developed in the 1940s after several harrowing flights while touring as a singer. This meant she often had to turn down lucrative opportunities, miss important industry events, and watch other actresses get roles that should have been hers. Calamity Jane, in 1953, showcased her range, but even that role was carefully calculated to maintain her wholesome image. Hitchcock's The Man Who Knew Too Much, in 1956, with James Stewart, was supposed to be her dramatic breakthrough, but the studio marketed it as another Doris Day musical. It was during the filming of this movie that Day first witnessed animal mistreatment in a marketplace scene, which sparked her lifelong dedication to animal welfare activism. But here's what they don't tell you. She was playing roles that had nothing to do with who she really was, and it was slowly killing her soul. That chemistry with Rock Hudson everyone raved about? 3 films together, including the Oscar-nominated Pillow Talk in 1959. What audiences didn't know was that their on-screen chemistry was built on mutual understanding of what it meant to hide your true self. Hudson was gay in an era when that could destroy careers, and Doris was broken in a way that Hollywood couldn't market. They were both performing versions of themselves that bore little resemblance to reality. She worked with Clark Gable, Cary Grant, James Cagney, Frank Sinatra, the biggest names in Hollywood. They all adored her, but did they ever really know her? Gable once said she was the most professional actress he'd ever worked with, but what he was really seeing was a woman who'd perfected the art of emotional compartmentalization. When she transitioned to television with The Doris Day Show from 1968 to 1973, it wasn't because she wanted to expand her horizons. It was because her husband had secretly signed her up without her knowledge or consent. More on that betrayal later, but imagine discovering your entire future had been decided without you. The awards kept coming. Golden Globe, Cecil B. DeMille Award, Presidential Medal of Freedom, Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award. But here's the kicker. In 2017, the Associated Press discovered through her birth certificate that Day had actually been born in 1922, not 1924, as she had believed her entire life. She released a statement saying, "I've always said that age is just a number, and I have never paid much attention to birthdays. But it's great to finally know how old I really am." Even her age was a mystery to herself. That's how disconnected she'd become from her own reality. By 2020, she was one of only 8 recording artists to have topped the box office 4 times. Her 29th studio album, My Heart, hit UK Top 10 in 2011. She was still performing at nearly 90, still giving audiences what they wanted instead of what she needed. But now comes the part they tried to hide. The part that explains why her smile was so convincing. Because she'd learned to smile through anything. Ready for the truth about America's sweetheart? The accident when dreams shattered into stardom. October 14th, 1937. Picture this. 16-year-old Doris Kapp is lying in Mercy Hospital in Cincinnati, her entire future in pieces around her. Just hours before, she'd been on top of the world, untouchable, unstoppable. In 12 hours, she'd gone from rising star to broken teenager, and she had no idea this catastrophe would actually save her life. The night before was supposed to be pure celebration. Doris and her dance partner Jerry Doherty had just signed a 5-year contract with an organization that supplied dancers to Hollywood. 5 years. They were headed for the big time, leaving behind their regular gigs at the Netherland Plaza Hotel and Cincinnati Club. Can you imagine that excitement? 16 years old. Hollywood calling, dreams about to come true. Their friends threw them a farewell party at Clarence Holden's house. Everyone was there. Dancers, musicians, local entertainers, who were living vicariously through Doris and Jerry's success. The energy was electric. People kept saying things like, "We'll see you in the movies," and "Don't forget us little people when you're famous." Doris felt invincible that night. She'd been dancing since she was a small child, working toward this moment for what felt like forever. The contract wasn't just a job. It was validation that all those hours of practice, all that sacrifice, all her mother's pushing had been worth it. Jerry was equally excited, maybe more so. He'd been her partner for 6 years, through countless rehearsals, small-time gigs, and big dreams. They moved together like they shared the same brain, the same heartbeat. When one of them got the opportunity, they both did. That's how partnerships work, when they're real. Then fate stepped in with a freight train. The ride home turned catastrophic when their car collided with that train at 5th and High Streets. The impact was devastating. The sound, horrific. Metal crushing metal, glass exploding, lives changing in an instant. In one horrible moment, Doris went from rising star to broken teenager, lying on bloody pavement. "My leg is broken! My leg is broken!" she cried out as paramedics loaded her into the ambulance. The pain was excruciating, but the emotional agony was worse. She could see her dreams disappearing with every mile the ambulance traveled away from that intersection. She was terrified, calling for her mother Alma, who'd planned to accompany her daughter to Hollywood. Can you imagine that fear? 16 years old, everything you've worked for disappearing in an instant, and you're helpless to stop it? The physical pain was nothing compared to watching her future crumble. Jerry rushed to her side in the hospital, his own heart breaking. They'd danced together for 6 years, preparing for this moment. Now it felt like everything had crashed down with that train. But Doris, even in agony, tried to comfort him. "I'll dance again," she promised, though her voice shook with uncertainty. She had no idea how wrong she was. The doctor's diagnosis confirmed what everyone feared. Severely broken leg, possibly permanent damage, 4 months minimum recovery. 4 months when she should have been in Hollywood, learning routines, meeting directors, starting her career. Her mother tried to stay positive, talking about waiting until spring for their trip. But spring felt like a lifetime away, and they all knew the opportunity wouldn't wait. Jerry's other passengers, Albert Schroeder and Marion Camp, had cuts and bruises, but were okay. At least someone walked away, unbroken. But for Doris, the physical healing was just the beginning of a much longer journey. Here's where the story gets interesting, though, and reveals the first glimpse of the woman she'd become. During her recovery, her mother gifted her a small dog named Tiny as a companion and distraction. The little dog became her constant companion during those long, painful weeks. But tragedy struck again when, while Doris was still on crutches, Tiny ran into the street during one of their walks and was fatally struck by a car. Imagine the helplessness, watching your beloved pet run toward danger and being physically unable to chase after him because of your own injury. As she stood there on crutches, watching Tiny die, something broke inside Doris that would never fully heal. This devastating loss would haunt her for the rest of her life and deepen her later commitment to animal welfare. But here's where we see the steel that would carry her through everything that followed. Instead of giving up, instead of wallowing in self-pity, Doris made a decision that changed everything. If she couldn't dance, she'd sing. Those weeks in the hospital became a vocal boot camp. She threw herself into voice training with the same intensity she'd once brought to ballet. Every day, while her leg healed, she worked on her voice. Scales, breathing exercises, song interpretation. She attacked it like her life depended on it. Because in a way, it did. The accident had taken away her first dream, but it had also given her time to discover a talent she'd never fully explored. And that's when destiny intervened again. Bandleader Les Brown heard her voice and recognized something extraordinary. The girl who'd lost her dancing career had found something even better. A voice that could touch souls, not just entertain eyes. He offered her a chance to sing with his band, which led directly to Sentimental Journey and everything that followed. But more importantly, it taught her the lesson that would define her entire life. When one dream dies, you can either die with it or use the wreckage to build something stronger. That accident didn't just break her leg. It broke her open and rebuilt her into something entirely different. The dancing dreams crashed, but the singing dreams soared. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the best thing that ever happened to you. But here's the part that really matters. That experience taught 16-year-old Doris that survival meant performance. Pain was private, but success was public. She learned to smile through agony, to entertain through heartbreak, to give audiences what they needed even when she was falling apart. Drop a comment if you've ever had a moment like that, where disaster turned into opportunity. Because what happened next proves that Doris's strength was just beginning to show itself, and she was going to need every ounce of it. She was a fake girl next door, the performance of a lifetime. Let's get something straight right now. That wholesome, innocent gee whiz persona everyone fell in love with? Pure acting. Doris Day was the greatest actress of her generation, not because of her movies, but because she convinced the world she was someone she absolutely wasn't. But here's the thing that'll blow your mind. The performance was so convincing that even she started to lose track of where Doris ended and the character began. That's not just good acting. That's psychological survival, taken to its logical extreme. Hollywood needed a girl next door after World War II. People were traumatized, exhausted, desperate for something pure and hopeful. Veterans were coming home with PTSD before anyone knew what to call it. Families were trying to rebuild after years of separation and loss. The entire country needed to believe that innocence was still possible, that goodness still existed somewhere. So they created Doris Day, the eternal optimist, the woman who'd never been touched by darkness, the living proof that the American dream was real. The problem? The real woman had been through hell and back before her 20th birthday. What made the facade particularly poignant was a traumatic discovery from her childhood that shaped everything that followed. At age 10, Doris discovered that her father, William, a music teacher and choir master who'd taught her to love music, was having an affair with the mother of her best friend. Can you imagine? 10 years old, and you learn that the man who's supposed to protect you is betraying your family in the cruelest way possible. But here's the devastating part. She discovered it by accident. She walked in on a conversation she wasn't supposed to hear, saw evidence she wasn't supposed to see. In that moment, her world shattered. The man who'd taught her that music was pure and beautiful was revealed to be a liar and a cheater. This betrayal had a profound effect on her and contributed to her parents' separation in 1932, leaving her to live with her increasingly protective mother. But more importantly, it taught her that the people you trust most can destroy you when you least expect it. That lesson carved itself into her soul, but she learned to hide it behind the brightest smile in Hollywood. Think about that. At 10 years old, she learned that performance was safer than truth, that showing people what they wanted to see was better than revealing what was actually happening. Her father's betrayal became her first masterclass in emotional self-protection. When she hit the scene in the late 1940s, the studio machine packaged her like a dream. Films like Romance on the High Seas and Pillow Talk showcased her as the perfect, lovable heroine who always got her man. America ate it up because they needed it desperately. They needed to believe that somewhere innocence still existed. But here's what was really happening behind the scenes. Doris was suffocating. The studios had created a persona so specific, so limiting, that she couldn't deviate from it without risking everything. She wanted to take on serious dramatic roles, parts that reflected the complexity she'd lived through, roles that would let her use her real experiences, her actual emotional range. The studios weren't having it. They'd found their golden goose, and they weren't about to let her lay different kinds of eggs. Play the part, Don't rock the boat. Keep smiling. That was her life for decades. Every script conference became a battle she couldn't win. But what if she had some depth here, she'd suggest. What if we showed that she's been hurt before? The answer was always the same. That's not what audiences want from Doris Day. The irony was crushing. She was being told she couldn't be herself because herself wasn't marketable. The woman who'd survived real trauma was told she wasn't tough enough to play characters who'd experienced fake trauma. The more successful she became, the more trapped she felt. People wanted her to be eternally cheerful, eternally innocent, eternally available to make them feel better about their own lives. But real people aren't eternal anything. They're complicated, messy, human. She'd watch other actresses get the roles she desperately wanted. The complex women, the damaged survivors, the characters who got to have real emotions. Meanwhile, she was stuck playing variations of the same character, the sweet girl who wins through goodness alone. By the 1960s, she was a household name, living in a prison of her own success. The public expected her to keep being that carefree woman, even as her personal life was imploding. Marriage problems, financial betrayal, family trauma, none of it mattered. Smile, Doris. Sing, Doris. Be what we need you to be. Here's the cruel irony. The men who loved Doris Day were falling for a complete fiction. They were attracted to a woman who didn't exist, created by studio executives who understood that fantasy sells better than reality. But here's what's fascinating. Somewhere deep down, audiences sensed there was more to her. They couldn't put their finger on it, but they felt the weight behind her lightness, the strength behind her sweetness. That's why her performances were so compelling. Real emotion was bleeding through the artificial construct. The real Doris Day was tougher, smarter, and infinitely more interesting than her screen persona. She was a survivor who'd learned to weaponize charm. She was a woman who'd been broken and rebuilt herself into something that could withstand anything. But the world wasn't ready for that woman. Not yet. Speaking of things the world wasn't ready for, wait until you hear about her first marriage. Because behind that sunny smile was a woman who'd already survived something unthinkable, something that would have destroyed most people before they ever got to Hollywood. She was a punching bag, the real Doris Day. You want to know why Doris Day was so convincing as the innocent girl next door? Because she'd already learned that showing vulnerability to the wrong person could get you hurt badly. Her first marriage to Al Jordan in 1946 started like a fairy tale and turned into a nightmare that would have destroyed most people. Al was a big band musician, charming and talented. When he wanted to be, he could make you feel like the most important person in the world. The romance was whirlwind, the kind that sweeps you off your feet before you realize you're falling off a cliff. In the beginning, Al seemed like everything Doris had been looking for. He understood the music business, he appreciated her talent, and he seemed to offer the stability she'd craved since her father's betrayal. After years of controlling management and manipulative studios, Al presented himself as her protector. But once they were married, once she was legally tied to him, Al's true nature emerged, and it was terrifying. He wasn't just emotionally manipulative, he was physically violent. And here's the part that'll make your blood boil. He was physically abusive toward Doris, even while she was pregnant with their son Terry. Let that sink in. She was carrying a child. She should have felt safe and protected. And instead, she was living in fear of the person who was supposed to love her most. When Jordan learned of Day's pregnancy, he demanded that she get an abortion, showing his volatile and controlling nature. Imagine the terror. You're 19 years old, pregnant with your first child, and the man who promised to cherish you is threatening violence if you don't destroy the life growing inside you. The psychological damage from that alone would take years to heal. But the abuse wasn't just about the pregnancy. It was systematic psychological warfare designed to break down her sense of reality. Al would tell her she was worthless, that her career was a fluke, that no one would ever love her if she left him. Classic abuser tactics that we understand better now. But in 1946, women had few resources, and even fewer people who'd believe them. He isolated her from friends and family, convinced her that her professional success was threatening to their marriage, and made her question her own perception of events. That didn't happen the way you remember it. You're being too sensitive. If you just tried harder, I wouldn't have to get angry. The gaslighting was relentless. Doris began to doubt her own memory, her own feelings, her own worth. She'd wake up each day wondering what mood he'd be in, what would set him off, how she could be better, quieter, more perfect. But here's where Doris showed the steel beneath that sunny exterior. She had to maintain her public image as America's rising sweetheart while living in private hell. Imagine going to work, singing happy songs, playing the cheerful wife in interviews, all while hiding bruises and terror. She'd show up to recording sessions with makeup covering marks, smile through photo shoots while her body ached, give interviews about her happy marriage while planning her escape. That performance, the one where she convinced the world she was the happiest woman alive while actually being a victim of domestic violence, might have been her greatest acting job ever. The breaking point came when Doris realized she couldn't protect her unborn child while staying in that situation. The moment she understood that Al's violence could harm Terry, something shifted inside her. Summoning every ounce of courage, she made the hardest decision of her life. She left, taking their son with her. In 1946, leaving an abusive husband wasn't just difficult, it was social and economic catastrophe for most women. Society blamed women for failing at marriage. Churches taught that wives should submit and endure. Even family members often pressured women to work it out rather than face the shame of divorce. But Doris had something many victims don't: a career that could support her and her child. She used her professional independence as a shield, but the emotional scars ran deep. After the divorce, Jordan visited his son Terry only sporadically and had little presence in his life, which was probably a blessing given his violent tendencies. The trauma from that marriage shaped every relationship that followed. She struggled with trust, with intimacy, with the fear that anyone who claimed to love her might turn violent. Those aren't wounds that heal quickly, if they ever heal completely. She developed hypervigilance, constantly scanning for signs of danger, for shifts in mood, for the warning signals that preceded violence. She learned to read people's emotions like her life depended on it, because once upon a time, it had. Think about this. Every time you saw Doris Day smile on screen after 1946, you were watching a woman who'd survived domestic violence and learned to hide her pain behind perfect performances. That smile wasn't innocent, it was armor. The men who fell for her screen persona had no idea they were attracted to someone whose strength had been forged in the worst possible circumstances. They saw sweetness where there was actually survival instinct. They saw innocence where there was actually hard-won wisdom about human nature's darkest possibilities. But Al Jordan wasn't the worst thing that would happen to her. The man who was supposed to save her, who was supposed to prove that love could be safe, would betray her in ways that made physical violence look simple by comparison. Wait until you meet Martin Melcher. Sleeping with the enemy, when love becomes theft. If you thought Al Jordan was bad, wait until you meet Martin Melcher. This man didn't just hurt Doris. He systematically destroyed her financially while making her believe he was protecting her. That's not just betrayal. That's psychological warfare disguised as love. When Doris married Martin in 1951, she thought she'd finally found someone who truly cared about her. After the nightmare with Al Jordan, Martin seemed like salvation. He was gentle, never raised his voice, never showed signs of violence. More importantly, he seemed to genuinely love both her and her son Terry. Martin wasn't just her husband. He was her manager, her business partner, the man she trusted with every aspect of her life. After surviving Al Jordan's abuse, that level of trust represented incredible courage. For years, it looked perfect. Martin handled all the money stuff, while Doris focused on what she did best: entertaining America. She was making movies, recording albums, being America's sweetheart. Meanwhile, Martin was supposedly taking care of the business side. Here's what was really happening. Martin was allegedly squandering her fortune, which was estimated to be around $20 million at the time. $20 million. In today's money, that's over $200 million. Gone. But it gets worse. Martin didn't just spend her money. He made sure she never knew how much danger they were in. No warnings, no budget discussions, no hints that they were heading for financial ruin. Doris was working her heart out, thinking they were building a secure future together. When Martin passed away in 1968, Doris began digging into their finances. What she discovered was beyond shocking. She discovered she was actually $500,000 in debt, a staggering amount that left her feeling completely betrayed and vulnerable. $500,000 in debt. The woman who'd been making millions for decades was not just broke. She owed more money than most people see in a lifetime. All because the man she trusted most had been lying to her face for 17 years. But here's the cruelest twist. Martin had secretly signed her up for the Doris Day show without her knowledge or consent. She found out about this major career commitment after he was gone. Can you imagine? Your husband commits you to years of work without even asking you. He knew that television series would be a massive undertaking, but rather than discussing it with her, he just made the decision on his own. It's like he was still controlling her life from beyond the grave. The financial devastation was just the beginning. Doris had to completely rebuild her relationship with money, with trust, with her own ability to make decisions. At age 46, she was starting over financially and emotionally. But here's what impressed me about Doris. She didn't crumble. She stepped into the Doris Day Show, and used it as a platform to claw her way back from financial ruin. Slowly, methodically, she rebuilt what Martin had destroyed. The lesson she learned was brutal but necessary. Trust should come with oversight. Love shouldn't mean blind faith in someone else's decisions about your life. Think about the men who watched the Doris Day Show in the early 1970s. They were falling in love with a woman who was simultaneously rebuilding her entire life from the ground up. That strength, that resilience, that's what they were really attracted to, even if they didn't realize it. Leave a comment. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely? Because what happened next shows that Doris's troubles were far from over. She was lonely, the price of being America's sweetheart. Here's the cruelest irony of Doris Day's life. She was loved by millions, but felt truly known by almost no one. Fame, it turns out, is the loneliest prison of all. Think about it. In the 1950s and 1960s, Doris was one of the most recognized faces on the planet. People felt like they knew her intimately because they'd grown up with her movies, her songs, her television show. But what they knew was a carefully crafted persona, not the woman behind it. The real Doris craved authentic connection. Those deep, honest conversations where you can drop all pretense and just be human. But fame made that nearly impossible. Every interaction was filtered through people's expectations of who she should be. At Hollywood parties, conversations always skimmed the surface. People were starstruck, nervous, or performing their own versions of who they thought she wanted them to be. Meanwhile, Doris was performing too, maintaining that sunny image even when she felt empty inside. She'd walk into a room and watch people's faces change. The natural, spontaneous interactions would stop, replaced by careful, managed conversations. People would tell her what they thought she wanted to hear, rather than what they actually thought. Genuine human connection became almost impossible. The media attention made it worse. Every personal detail became gossip. Every relationship was scrutinized. How do you form genuine friendships when you know anything you say might end up in tomorrow's headlines? How do you trust someone when you can't tell if they like you or your fame? Her romantic life added layers to the loneliness. After Al Jordan's abuse and Martin Melcher's financial betrayal, she was understandably cautious about trusting anyone new. She wanted companionship desperately, but her past had taught her that the people closest to you could hurt you the most. Dating became a minefield. How do you know if someone likes you for yourself or for your celebrity? How do you tell if they're genuine or performing their own version of what they think you want? Every romantic possibility was tainted by the question of motive. In her quieter moments, and there were many, Doris would reflect on the strange emptiness that success had brought. She had everything the world said should make her happy. Fame, fortune, adoration from millions. So why did she feel so hollow inside? She'd sit in her beautiful home, surrounded by luxury that most people could only dream of, and feel completely alone. The house would be perfect. The gardens manicured, everything exactly as America's sweetheart should live. But it felt like a museum of someone else's life. She'd often say that despite all her achievements, there was a void that no amount of applause could fill. What she wanted was simple and seemingly impossible. Someone real to share her life with. Someone who saw past the image to the complicated woman underneath. The irony was that she was surrounded by people, agents, managers, staff, hangers-on, but felt completely isolated. Everyone wanted something from her. Everyone had an agenda. Everyone was performing their own version of what they thought she needed to hear. Here's what breaks my heart. Doris poured herself into her music and acting partly because it was the only way she could connect authentically with people. Through her performances, she could share her real emotions, her genuine feelings, without the filter of celebrity. Songs like Que Sera Sera resonated so deeply because they came from a woman who truly understood uncertainty and hope. She wasn't just singing lyrics, she was sharing her soul with people who could never hurt her because they'd never really meet her. When she sang about whatever will be, she was drawing from real experience of loss, betrayal, and the necessity of accepting life's unpredictability. The audiences sensed that authenticity, even if they couldn't identify its source. The men who fell in love with Doris Day were responding to that authentic emotion bleeding through her performances. They sensed the real woman beneath the image, the strength behind the sweetness, the wisdom behind the innocence. They were falling for her truth, even when it was wrapped in fiction. But loneliness was just one of the prices she paid for fame. The ultimate price was yet to come, and it would test every ounce of strength she'd built up over the decades. Her son passed away, the tragic loss. If you want to understand what truly broke Doris Day's heart, it wasn't the abuse, the financial betrayal, or the loneliness. It was losing her son, Terry Melcher, in 2004, the one person who knew the real her and loved her anyway. Terry was born in 1942 during that nightmare marriage to Al Jordan. From the very beginning, Terry represented hope for Doris, proof that something beautiful could come from something terrible. Terry was named after the hero of his mother's favorite comic strip, Terry and the Pirates, showing Doris's playful side even during difficult times. From the beginning, Doris was fiercely protective of him, determined to give him the stability she'd never had as a child. She was going to break the cycle of damage that had defined her own upbringing. Terry would know he was loved unconditionally, not for what he could do or how he could perform, but simply for existing. Growing up in Hollywood could have destroyed Terry, but somehow Doris managed to raise him with his feet on the ground. She shielded him from the worst aspects of fame, while still allowing him to pursue his own dreams. He became a talented music producer and songwriter, working with legends like the Byrds and Paul McCartney. He carved out his own identity, separate from his mother's enormous shadow. But here's something most people don't know. Something that reveals the bond between mother and son. In a chilling connection to one of America's most notorious crimes, Terry had a close encounter with Charles Manson in 1968. As a record producer, Terry had been introduced to Manson through Beach Boys drummer Dennis Wilson. Manson wanted a recording contract and even auditioned for Terry, but Terry ultimately rejected him. More significantly, Terry had been living at 10,050 Cielo Drive with his girlfriend Candice Bergen, a house that Manson had visited. When Doris learned about Manson's disturbing behavior and that he had been to Terry's house, her maternal instincts kicked in, and she insisted that Terry move out immediately. Terry moved to a beach house owned by his mother in January 1969. 7 months later, members of the Manson family took the lives of actress Sharon Tate and 4 others at that very same Cielo Drive address. According to Beach Boys' Mike Love, a mother's intuition, perhaps, and it may have saved his life. Can you imagine? Doris's protective instincts literally saved her son's life. She couldn't explain it rationally, but something about Manson had triggered every alarm bell she'd developed from years of surviving dangerous people. That's the kind of bond they had. She could sense danger, even when others couldn't see it. Terry and Doris were incredibly close throughout his life. They'd lean on each other through everything. Her career, ups and downs, his struggles in the music business, the family dramas that seemed to follow them everywhere. He was the one person who'd known her before the fame, who remembered her just as mom. He understood the weight she carried, the performance she had to maintain, the loneliness that came with being America's sweetheart. When she was with Terry, she could drop the mask completely. She could be scared, angry, vulnerable, human. He loved all of those versions of her. As they both got older, their relationship deepened. Terry had his own successful career, his own family, his own life, but he remained Doris's anchor to reality. He was proof that despite everything she'd been through, she'd managed to raise a good man who genuinely loved her. Then came 2004, and the diagnosis that changed everything: skin cancer. Doris watched helplessly as her beloved son battled the disease. It was devastating for a woman who'd already endured so much heartache throughout her life. Terry fought hard, but the cancer took its toll. The treatments were brutal, the prognosis uncertain. Doris, who'd always been able to fix things, to perform her way out of problems, to somehow survive whatever life threw at her, was powerless to help the person she loved most. When he passed away in November 2004 at the age of 62, it was like an earthquake in Doris's world. She'd lost the one person who truly knew her, who'd loved her unconditionally, who'd been her anchor through every storm. The grief was unlike anything she'd experienced before. This wasn't betrayal or abuse or financial ruin. This was the fundamental rupture of the most important relationship in her life. The person who'd made all her struggles worthwhile was gone. After Terry's passing, those close to Doris noted that she became increasingly reclusive, spending most of her time with her countless rescued animals at her Carmel home, finding more comfort with them than with people. That tells you everything about her grief, doesn't it? The woman who'd entertained millions found more solace with animals than humans, because animals don't judge, don't betray, don't break your heart with their ambitions or their weaknesses. Doris poured her grief into animal rights activism, dedicating her energy to making the world better for creatures who couldn't protect themselves. It was as if she was honoring Terry's memory by channeling her pain into something positive. In her final years, some alleged that she became increasingly isolated and manipulated by those around her, with her grandson Ryan claiming he was prevented from seeing her by her longtime manager. The woman who'd given so much to the world seemed to be disappearing into herself, trusting fewer and fewer people. She passed away in 2019 at age 97, specifying in her will that she wanted no funeral, no memorial service, and no grave marker. No funeral, no memorial, no marker. Even in the end, she wanted to disappear quietly, without the fanfare that had surrounded her entire public life. The woman who'd given joy to countless people chose to leave this world as privately as possible, surrounded not by Hollywood's elite, but by the animals she'd rescued and who'd rescued her in return. The truth about why men loved Doris Day. So here's the answer to the question that started this whole journey. Why did men love Doris Day? It wasn't because she was innocent. It wasn't because she was the perfect girl next door. It wasn't because she represented some idealized version of womanhood that never really existed. Men loved Doris Day because somewhere deep down, they sensed the real woman beneath the performance. They were attracted to her strength, even when it was disguised as sweetness. They responded to her resilience, even when it was packaged as optimism. They fell for her authenticity, even when it was filtered through studio-manufactured personas. Think about what she actually represented. A woman who'd been broken by life and chose to keep giving joy to others. A woman who'd been betrayed by the people she trusted most and still found ways to love. A woman who'd survived abuse, financial ruin, and heartbreak that would have destroyed most people, yet still showed up every day with a smile. The real Doris Day was a survivor who'd been through hell and came out singing. She was a woman who'd been beaten down by life and chose to get back up. She was someone who'd been betrayed by the people she trusted most and still found ways to trust. That's not innocence, that's wisdom. That's not naivety, that's courage. That's not the girl next door. That's a warrior in a pretty dress. The men who watched her movies, who bought her records, who fell in love with her image, were actually responding to something much deeper than they realized. They were attracted to a woman who embodied the possibility of surviving anything and still finding reasons to smile. In a world that constantly tries to break us down, Doris Day represented the radical idea that you could be broken and still be beautiful, that you could be damaged and still be whole, that you could be hurt and still be hopeful. Her strength wasn't the obvious kind. It wasn't defiance or aggression or revenge. It was the quiet, steady strength of someone who'd learned that survival sometimes means performance, that protecting others sometimes means hiding your own pain, that love sometimes means giving even when you have nothing left. That's why her story matters. Not because she was perfect, but because she was human. Not because she had easy answers, but because she kept asking the questions. Not because she was America's sweetheart, but because she was America's survivor. The next time you watch a Doris Day movie or hear one of her songs, remember this. You're not just watching entertainment. You're witnessing the performance of someone who turned pain into art, trauma into triumph, and loneliness into love songs that touched millions. That's the real reason men loved Doris Day. Not because she was what they thought they wanted, but because she was what they actually needed. Proof that you can go through hell and still find your way to heaven. And maybe that's the most beautiful love story of all. If Doris Day's real story moved you as much as it moved me, then you need to hear about the other Hollywood legends who hid their pain behind perfect smiles. These aren't just stories. They're reminders that the strongest people are often the ones carrying the heaviest burdens. Hit that subscribe button if you believe these hidden truths deserve to be told, because the real stories are always more powerful than the myths.